Hi, I'm Perry Atkinson, General Manager here at theDove. Hey, check out our other videos and check out our website at thedove.us. Welcome back, and we've all been watching with incredible interest and almost shock and sadness the Duggar family case, and pretty much all over the news. And this has brought back to the table the discussion of, sexual abuse and molestation of children. I am delighted to have back with us today Dr. Jared Pingleton. He's the clinical psychologist and director of counseling services at Focus on the Family. And in his nearly 40 years of professional clinical experience, he's counseled many families through a variety of painful life circumstances, such as those of sexual abuse and molestation. So, Dr. Pingleton, good to see you again. How you doing, my friend?
Doing well, Perry. Thank you. How are you?
Thank you. I wish I had you for about 2 hours. I only got you for a few moments. But this whole sad case that's been all over the news has brought this subject back to the forefront. And hopefully God will use this to help us all understand what happens to a child when this occurs. And tell us about it.
Well, tragically, whenever a child is violated, there is an enormous amount of challenging results that are very painful, difficult, and complicated. It's confusing to a child, and in essence, as bad and wrong as what happens on the outside is, what happens on the inside is even worse. I call childhood sexual abuse raping of the soul, because one's will is violated, one's sexuality is prematurely activated. There's a lot of confusion, bewilderment, shame, fear, and stress that a child is presented with in this kind of a scenario.
When does it usually show up in life later on?
Well, one thing that's very important to talk about and distinguish here is there's a big continuum as to severity of abuse and duration of abuse. All abuse is wrong. There is no excuse ever for someone being abused, but the more severe the abuse, typically the longer it takes for that to sort of surface or emerge. And part of the reason for that, I think, Perry, is the way that God created us is that children are not able to handle, obviously, as much stress and strain as are adults, whether that be figuratively or literally carrying a load, that obviously children are not as strong. And so when a child has any kind of severe trauma, whether it's sexual or emotional or otherwise, there is a very difficult ability for them to handle it. Think of it as an electrical circuit. If we plugged 3 dryers, 4 vacuum cleaners, 3 microwaves into an extension cord, obviously the wiring would not be strong enough to carry that much load or current. And so what happens is there is a circuit breaker, hopefully, in the house that is activated and everything just shuts down. Similarly, that's how children are wired, if you will, emotionally. And until that ability to withstand more stress and cope with more pain increases, they're not able to deal with it. So specifically, the research shows about 20 to 25 years after the abuse ends is when most people are able to kind of come to grips with it, acknowledge, accept, and work through the pain.
Are there signs for us to be looking out for?
There are. Many times when children are sexually abused, they react in one of 2 extremes. They either become kind of hypersexual, promiscuous, and because they're taught that's all they're for, and so their whole identity is sexualized in an inappropriate way, or they become kind of the opposite, to where their sexuality is so shamed and hidden and submerged that they have a very difficult time experiencing healthy relationships with the opposite gender.
Are we primarily talking here, Dr. Pingleton, adult to a child violation?
That's a good question, Perry. There's all manner of childhood violations. The majority actually are child to child. And The myth of the dirty old man in the sort of overcoat on the street corner comprises a very, very small segment of childhood sexual violations. About 90 to 95% of all childhood sexual violations are done by people they know. Many times family members or extended family members or trusted leaders and authorities in the community.
What is the proper response when you suspect it or perhaps even know it?
Well, if the child is a minor, obviously, as a licensed psychologist, I am required by law to report that to the state authorities so that Child Protective Services can investigate and do two things. One, protect the child from further damage. Two, try to protect society at large from further damage by the perpetrator and hopefully get them some help. The research shows, Perry, and a lot of folks aren't sympathetic to this, but it's a fact. The research shows about 95% of all pedophiles were themselves molested. And so what we have here is kind of like slinkies. Remember those little coiled metal things that go down the staircase? Exodus 20 verse 5 says the sins of the fathers get passed down to the third and fourth generations. And that's what we have happen almost always when there is incest in family systems or childhood sexual molestation or trauma in other ways. Most people who do violate others were themselves violated as children.
When would a child know that what's happening is wrong? In other words, I've read some cases that's quite young and others that's a little bit older. Or do they know instinctively something that's going on here?
It's a great question. Unfortunately, there's not a simple answer. The truth is, many adult pedophiles will spend hours and hours, some estimates are 100 to 150 hours of emotionally seducing, if you will, the child before they ever touch them inappropriately or do any illegal or harmful activity to them physically or sexually. So lulling them into a false sense of security is actually almost the norm. So there is confusion on the part of the child, but many times, again, they're not aware of their sexuality. And if they are not taught by their parents proper good touch and bad touch, many times they don't understand anything wrong with the behavior. The truth is, the way we were created, physical sensation is something that the body receives as pleasurable in certain ways. And so there is often a lot of shame and confusion if they were taught, but there is often a threat that if you tell, or this is our little secret, then, I'll kill your doggy or your little brother, or tell your parents that you did this. And so the secret is kind of reinforced by the perpetrator. So many times all of that pain and hurt and fear and confusion and shame gets just pushed down because of the intimidation or the threat of the perpetrator.
Again, I wish I had you for hours. Is it true that sometimes this doesn't surface till way later on in life and well into a marriage, and then it surfaces, and some marriages don't survive it when it comes out?
Boy, you hit on a huge issue there, Perry. And let's back up for a minute and look at incidence statistics. The studies show that about 1 out of 3 and 1 out of 4 to 6 boys in America will be molested by age 18. So we're talking about a huge number, millions of people who have experienced childhood sexual trauma. And obviously, it's just logical to presume the implications of this trauma onto the marriage are significant. And yes, many times because of the difficulties that people experience both within themselves and between their spouse, it makes marriage functioning, particularly healthy sexual functioning in a good marriage, very challenging. And I think there's where compassion and understanding and empathy on the part of the non-wounded spouse is so essential to mediate grace and mercy and love and forgiveness and acceptance and patience, the attributes of love in 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8, to where that spouse can experience a redemptive sense of valuing that, they're really cared for on the inside. And working with adult survivors of trauma, one thing I emphasize to them very strongly, Perry, is that as bad, wrong, horrible, confusing, and upsetting as what happened to you on the outside was and is, what happened to you on the inside is even worse. So I think the spouse needs to understand that too, because the will is violated. And that's one thing God never does, is to violate our will. And all children's innocence is destroyed, their trust is violated. Those are the things that make it very difficult to healthfully relate to themselves, to God, and to their spouse.
Well, Dr. Pingleton, I have 500 questions and only a minute left. Let me ask you this. What resources do you have there to focus on the family through your department that people can get a hold of?
Good question. At focusonthefamily.com, we have a lot of resources on our website. We have articles, we have books, we have broadcasts, CDs, podcasts, links to other websites. So we have a lot of resources available on our website. And Perry, I would encourage folks to call us at 1-800-A-FAMILY. I oversee a team of 16 licensed clinicians, and we deal with these issues every day. So if people would call us, we will help them at 1-800-A-FAMILY.
You know, the last time I was there, I heard the number that you guys are taking in about 10,000 phone calls a month. Is that true?
Yes, we do. We work with about 250 people a day, directly in our department, and then in other departments, a lot of other folks as well.
Wow. Well, Dr. Pingleton, thank you. Let's hook up again. I think now that this is back in the forefront of a lot of discussion. In fact, Megyn Kelly last night, Fox News, most of her show was dealing with this. And you know the reaction from both sides. But at the end of the day, it's the innocence of the children. And there's another violation here. Obviously, it looks like the leaking of the report shouldn't have gotten out. And maybe you have some big comments on that, and I'd love to hear from you on that one. So let's hook up again real soon, okay?
I'd be glad to, Perry. God bless you.
All right, thank you. And thanks for all you guys there at Focus. You guys do a wonderful job.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
Okay, we'll see you next time on Focus Today.